Thank you for joining us. My name is Megan. I will facilitate the session today. We are joined by both Stephen Dixon and Kevin Bork, who are going to take us through RETScreen's virtual energy analyzer and net zero planning tool. There's going to be some hands-on activities, so I hope that everybody's had a chance to install RETScreen as well as the software key temporary that you would have received from Save on Energy's training and support team. We issued that on Monday. If you did not receive the key, I'm going to put my email in the chat right now, and you can email me directly, and I will share that with you. And I also want to let everybody know we are recording this session. The session recording will be housed on Save on Energy's website about a week from now. If you have questions as we go, feel free to use the chat feature and I'll make sure that those questions get answered. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen.
Great, thank you, Megan. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see a few folks out there. A question in, I have a full version of RETScreen. Is that applicable? Yeah, absolutely applicable. So no, you don't have to use the training one. So yeah, if you've got your full version of RETScreen, you're all good to go. And yeah, and we're going to have some fun today with RETScreen. So in addition to seeing an expert, so to speak, Kevin, sorry, like an expert like Kevin who works at RETScreen expert, he will demonstrate some of the key features of the archetypes, but also of the net zero planning tool, which utilizes the deep carbon archetype. So these two things are linked together within the tool. So there's some neat features that you get to learn about. Even the fact that when you open up an archetype, there's some neat features in the, if I were to take an archetype, which is sort of a very typical building, and open it, you know, in Toronto, and then I open it in Thunder Bay, the same building will actually get a potentially different configuration of low carbon technology. So RETScreen's archetypes are quite intelligent in this latest version. All right, so the way we're going to start off today, though, is I am going to give a quick little tour of RETScreen and some of the key features of it. I always like to do this at the beginning. For some of you, this will be a bit of review. Please forgive me. For those that haven't, you'll get to see, you know, what this tool is really capable of in some ways. And then once I've done that, I'll introduce Kevin, who will basically take us through the archetypes, which are accessed through the virtual energy analyzer. Once Kevin has walked us through, demonstrated some features, we're going to give you a little assignment. We're going to ask you to go in the virtual energy analyzer, pull up an archetype, make a change, and see if you can detect carbon reduction as a result of the change you put in place. So it's a very simple activity, but it'll get your hands on how to use these archetypes. That part's pretty straightforward. Then it gets a bit more complicated because then Kevin is going to walk us through the net zero planning tool, which is essentially part of the portfolio analysis tool in RETScreen. And it will allow us to build a portfolio of buildings, which will then have technologies and operating parameters applied to take them to zero carbon. So we're going to do this twice. The first time Kevin will walk through it relatively quickly, just to give you a sense of what the pathway is and what the outcome looks like. Once we've done that, then we're going to back up, and Kevin is going to walk all of us through it again. So we'll go slow enough that you can enter parameters into your software and see the results as they come up. The idea being, you know, making sure people have had that hands-on experience. And throughout, even though it says wrap up and Q&A, as we move throughout the webinar today, there will be an opportunity. Megan and to myself will be monitoring the chat, and we'll be trying to respond to those questions as we go. We'll leave a little bit of time at the end, but Megan also wants to make us aware of some ongoing coaching that's available after this session and some other tools that are available from Save on Energy as well. So this webinar is part of a whole suite of offerings from Save on Energy around efficient electrification. And we'll hear more about that a little bit later on. So right now, the overview of RETScreen Expert. You know, I have to admit that I'm a bit of a converted person when it comes to RETScreen. I've worked with RETScreen for many years, and being involved since the days it was a spreadsheet. Greg Lang, the creator of RETScreen, right? He's been the real champion of this thing going way back. Somewhere along the lines, I met Greg and his other staff and became a contributor as well to RETScreen. And I think that's one of the things that's key about RETScreen. A lot of times, a piece of software has a small group of people that are contributing to to the functionality of it. But RETScreen has drawn upon experts like myself and many, many other peoples to input their expertise into the software. And for that reason, it's a very comprehensive tool. Kevin, I'll often quote you as saying, even you don't know everything in RETScreen, and I'll definitely admit that I don't know everything in RETScreen. So collectively, the RETScreen team does know all those things. So that's one reason that today, when we set up to do this webinar, I asked work with Save and I say, let's get Kevin over here to do this, right? Let's get Kevin here. We'll bring our training team. Kevin, you've got the sort of the knowledge of the various bits and pieces, and we'll work together to really bring this to the folks. So RETScreen builds itself as an intelligent decision support tool. And I think that's a really good way to describe what we're going to see here today is how do you make intelligent decisions about taking a building to lower carbon, right? To net zero ultimately, right? And RETScreen has a way to support that. RETScreen is a tool that's available like the world over, 38 different languages. So really, there are very few barriers to people using this around the world. And in fact, it's great because we do a lot of training where we involve people from other countries, and we can actually send a file to them in our language, and it appears on the software in their language. So very, very flexible from that point of view. Somebody once said to me, Steve, well, this thing is an all-in-one project tool for energy, which it is. Right, there have been many bodies that have funded this tool, including the ISO, who's behind Save on Energy here today, but also NRCan as the champion of this, right, with Greg as the key person, the creator, the champion of this, and the primary funder, but also organizations like REAP and UNEP, NASA. NASA supports this tool in a number of ways, not the least of which is the use of their satellite database. So if we do performance analysis from RETScreen, we can get the hourly data for what the weather was like yesterday, and I can use that in my analysis. I use that all the time, and I could spend all day talking about all the different ways you can use this tool, but it's very useful. And then global environment facility. So there's many others that have funded and provided guidance to RETScreen, in addition to all the experts that have contributed their knowledge and experience. The toolbox has got many, many tools in it. We're going to focus on the last and the first one today. We'll end up at the end, but we'll start with the virtual energy analyzer. And the virtual energy analyzer is a tool that allows us to work with what we call archetypes for a particular building or facility or a measure or a system. An archetype, I look up the word archetype, and it's defined as something that's very, very typical. So these archetypes have been built to essentially present you situations that are maybe very familiar to your own situations. They're not necessarily your situation, and Kevin's going to show us how we can tailor these things to your situation, right? So basically, it's a great tool if you've never used RETScreen in any of its functionality, especially in the feasibility analysis. What if I change this to that? Like, that's how I describe it. A base case and a proposed case. This is the way it is today. And I want to, change it to that. What's the outcome going to be? And RETScreen presents a whole multitude of building types, facilities, systems, and pieces of equipment. So we can do this at a measure level or a whole facility level. And as it says here, no audit is required. You don't have to actually do an energy audit to begin to use RETScreen on your building. Now, you can move forward incrementally and bring information in that you could collect in the building and modify the archetypes and eventually end up with your building. Start out with a very typical building and move to your building. Kevin's going to show us how to scale the archetypes today, because that's going to be really useful. Benchmarking, right? Always good to know where a building stands. And RETScreen provides you with the ability to do that in a number of ways. One is to simply compare your building to information from databases, from external reference sources in terms of energy intensities. You can do it on energy, cost, and carbon. You can compare buildings within your own portfolio, right? So your own group of buildings, or you can compare, I like to say, compare a building to itself, which is really the definition of performance analysis, looking at how this building performance changes over time. So in that sense, benchmarking is a starting point. Feasibility is what we do to change a building to a more efficient or a lower carbon state, and understand what the energy, the cost, the emissions impacts are. And eventually, performance analysis allows us to monitor the building's performance over time. I love to use performance analysis right at the beginning. I like to go back whenever I begin to work with any kind of building or system. If I have data from that over time, I can pull that into RETScreen and analyze it and really begin to understand how that system, that piece of equipment, or that building got to today. How did it arrive at today? And what's its path? And what's its trajectory? Is it on a trajectory of increasing energy, reducing energy, or staying constant? It's a great tool for really understanding how performance is changing and the acronym here, M&V, measurement verification, being able to measure and verify the savings that might ensue when we take any action. Eventually, we aren't going to just be dealing with a single building or a single measure, but we have tools in RETScreen called the portfolio analysis tool, which allow us to bring many of these things together. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the virtual energy analyzer. We're going to look at some low carbon archetypes and some low energy archetypes. Then Kevin's going to show us how to assemble a portfolio of lower carbon archetypes, right? And really look at what that suggests we should do in that particular portfolio of buildings. I think we're going to pick a municipal portfolio today, Kevin, because what the neat thing about municipal portfolios, they've got many different building types. So if I can go to a commercial real estate company, they may have, one or two types of buildings, right? But in terms of the nice thing about portfolio, we do have a variety of buildings in here. So if you have 10 buildings of all the same type, it kind of doesn't make a lot of variety on the screen. So we're going to try to spice it up for you a little bit. So that's kind of the overview of RETScreen Expert. In terms of projects types, I'm not going to read all these things. If you can think of something to do to reduce energy, reduce carbon, reduce the costs associated with energy or carbon, there's probably a way to analyze it in RETScreen, right? And that includes everything from large standalone power plants, right, from on wind, solar, photovoltaics, whatever, all the way down to specific measures like changing a light bulb, right? You can just do that measure. Or you're going out to buy a new vehicle tomorrow. Which vehicle should I buy? What's the cost benefit to going to an EV versus a hybrid vehicle? Well, RETScreen has a tool for that too, right? It's like, it's got a tool for almost everything. I don't think it can make coffee yet, but I'm still waiting for that one. But actually, you know what? There's probably a place in there where you can figure out if you have like maybe waste coffee beans. There's actually a tool in there. You can look at the biomass energy content of different things. And I know there's things like straw and manure and things like that. So maybe there's some coffee beans in there as well. RETScreen has a lot of databases built in, which really makes it easy to work. And I wish I had more time today to show you all these things. But nevertheless, you've got a 30-day license in your hands right now. Give it a try if you haven't done it before. Have a look at some of these things. I'll show you a few places where you can explore beyond the archetypes what you can do with RETScreen. So the databases that are in this is embedded data and information. For example, let's say I'm saying, I want to convert my gas furnace to a heat pump. I wonder what that heat pump performance specification might look like. Well, I can go into a database. I can pull up that heat pump, right? Or a heat pump. I can come up with the performance specifications, and it has granular right down to things like manufacturers and model numbers. I can do this for renewable energy systems, but for conventional energy systems. So when I'm going through and doing my initial what if, I don't have to go, I got to call a supplier to get some data. I have to go to the web. No, I can probably find it within RETScreen. And you may be able to find the cost data for that measure you're trying to put in place too within RETScreen. So that's going to make that first what if kind of analysis quite quick and rapid. These are all leveraged within the archetypes. Climate data. Climate data is longer term data. And RETScreen has, based on ground-based monitoring stations with a little bit of augmentation with NASA's satellite data, they have a whole suite built into the software of climate data. So basically long-term averages of temperatures and solar radiation, humidities, ground temperature, heating and cooling degree days, all the things that we need to do energy calculations in RETScreen. Weather data. So that same basic set of data is now available through NASA's satellite-derived meteorological database, or a cloud database in a sense, from satellites. Kind of funny, right? Cloud and satellite. Anyway, you've got all this data you can look into. And like I said, you can get it right down to an hourly basis. I use this. So if I'm looking at demand profiles of a building, electricity and gas profiles hourly, I can go and download the hourly temperatures and the hourly solar radiations. Or in one case, we were seeing a spike in electrical demand in a building. I went and got the precipitation data and realized that the spike in electrical demand was a ramp heater. So I could correlate the data from NASA's precipitation data to the electricity consumed in the building. A powerful tool for doing energy investigations. If you're into hydrology or to water power, there's flow duration loads or data sets. Project data. The archetypes, which Kevin's going to look at, is one of these, but case studies and templates are also tools that you have, and I'll explain those in a few minutes. Benchmarking data. So there's lots of benchmarking data built into RETScreen. You look for that little house on a balance icon, and you can get to that. Kevin, maybe we can just highlight that one quickly when we're in there. And then energy resource maps like wind. So there is just a lot of data which you can use to do your what if analysis. Most people don't use a fraction of this. In terms of the projects, I like to ask the question, how would you do, and this is kind of gives us an idea of how we use RETScreen, how would you look at the destratification fan in a high bay. Let's say you got a high bay space and the air at the ceiling is 5 degrees warmer than the air at the floor. How would you calculate the savings for that? I'm going to challenge anybody to search RETScreen to find a destratification fan model. I don't think there's one in there. But the way we use RETScreen is we look at the situation and think about what's going to change, what's going to cause the energy savings. And you realize if the temperature at the ceiling becomes cooler when you destratify the air at the ceiling, less heat loss. So all we have to do is model the heat loss through with the building envelope model in RETScreen and the temperature schedules. We can model that pretty easily. So analyzing a project in RETScreen comes down to abstracting that physical situation and representing it within the tools that we have. And you'll see more of that if you haven't gone in here as Kevin goes into the archetypes. So I'm not, rather than me going through and doing a tour around at this point, I'm going to let sort of Kevin, once he opens the archetypes, I think he'll give you as much of a tour. But the one thing I will tell you is when we're using RETScreen, the terminology we'll use is, Kevin, there'll be the top menu, right? There'll be the top menu. There's the left-hand menu. There's the getting started options where we're going to go into the archetypes and the portfolio. And over on the right-hand side here, there's a lot of little assistants and other integrated features. And I'm going to share with you a couple of the integrated features. You were going to say something, Kevin. I can see a word on the tip of your tongue. No. Okay, good. Cool. All right. So some learning resources. If you want to take RETScreen out to test drive it after this webinar, what can you do? Well, you can go on the front screen to the thing called Case Studies and Templates. It's right over here in the second column, about 2/3 of the way down, Case Studies and Templates. And when you go in there, you'll see a list of case studies and templates. These are, a case study is a real project that's been analyzed in RETScreen, and usually there's like a link to the actual real project case study itself. A template is a hypothetical project which demonstrates some of the features of RETScreen. So you can use the search bar there to click on whatever you'd like, right? You can basically say, I want to see a project on, pumping systems in agriculture. And then if there's one in there, it'll find it for you. Once you go into the case study or template, if you click on the blue link on the left-hand side there, right, you'll actually see a textual description of the situation. If you double click on the line in that list, you'll get the solution. It's kind of like, here's the problem, here's the solution, whether it be a case study or a template. Lots of things. We use this all the time in our training work that we do, because they're fairly informative situations that have been set up as a learning resource. In addition to that, once you get into the software and you're all lost and you're on the screen, you go, oh, I wonder what Kevin would do in this situation, or I wonder what Stephen would do in this situation. You can do a few things. You can click on the label and you can see some textual help, which is great, right? And then sometimes there's even a picture attached to it if you click into that. Or what I really love is the inline or the embedded video help. So there's an e-learning icon in many of the screens. If you click on that, it'll give you a list of some of the videos related to the context that you're in. So we're analyzing a pumping system in this screenshot here. Well, guess what? We can then go to RETScreen's YouTube e-learning channel and have a look at me talking about how to use the pumping tool. So you can kind of watch the video, put your data in, come back to the video, and go back and forth like that. So it's a great way to sort of lead yourself through some of this with video help, as opposed to just the textual help itself. So some good learning resources. Now, that kind of leads us to where Kevin is going to take us into RETScreen. I'm going to just show you a couple of slides, then I'm going to ask Kevin in a second or two to actually share his screen and walk us through these archetypes. All right, so the archetypes are accessed from the main screen via the button right at the top of the main screen. It says Virtual Energy Analyzer. That's the access point. And then that kind of opens the world to you, literally, because when you go in there, the first thing you're going to see is a map, and you can go anywhere in the world. You can take an archetype that is a very typical building and drop it down. It could be a typical building, or it could be a particular measure. Maybe it's heat recovery in a residential situation. So you can basically say, tell me what that measure looks like anywhere in the world. And RETScreen will adjust its internals to deal with that. The measures themselves, or the archetypes, there's two groups of archetypes. And the reason this is important is because the second group is the group of archetypes that become the basis for the net zero planning tool that will be the second part of our presentation today. So the first level is what we call low energy archetypes, a 30 to 40% reduction in energy consumption. These are the original and traditional type of projects, right, which reduce energy. And then there is the 80 to 90% carbon reduction archetype. So these ones have an objective, getting your carbon down by up to 90%, and that's demonstrated by the outcome screen here. You're going to look at the screen in the activity a little bit later on. And then what's behind that then is all the actions that are taken. And Kevin's going to give us a tour of those, I guess, beginning right now, Kevin. So over to you to share your screen and walk us through. And if there's any questions, please stop us. If you can try to follow us through these. Kevin will probably go a little quicker than you would if you're following, but then we're going to give you a little assignment afterwards where you get to try it out and get us an answer based on some changes you make. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, the next couple of minutes, I want to sort of walk through the archetypes. And, you know, I have repeatedly said, and Stephen has as well, that the archetypes is where I start many of my projects, in fact, almost all of them. And they're right here under this button here, under the virtual energy analyzer. And the virtual energy analyzer is our tool that gives us access to the archetypes, but at the same time allows us to define where we are and so forth. And so I'm going to start by clicking on the virtual energy analyzer. And as Stephen mentioned, this map shows up. And we basically, when we were developing this, I remember we said it's click, click, click within how much can we get a full energy analysis in 3 clicks? And the result is our virtual energy analyzer. So what we basically do is we select what we want to do and where we want to do it, what type of facility we're working with or want to do our analysis on, and where that project is. So I'm going to go down this list here. You'll see here within the list of archetypes, this is, we call their facility type. Think of it as the category. So a power plant would be producing electricity, that you're either in a net meter scenario or more likely in a selling onto the grid. And you'll see here under power plant, there's lots of different types of energy systems, photovoltaic, and even subtypes. Here we have tracking systems and static systems and so forth. We also have power heating, cooling, and all the combinations thereof. So cogeneration, CHP, all those types of things, and some, including even district energy systems for whole municipalities or large sort of districts like a university and so forth. We also have storage, battery storage, energy storage, off-grid systems in there as well. And way at the bottom, we have transportation archetypes. So I find not quite that many people know about these. So if you'll see here, we have, say, on-road vehicles, we have different types of archetypes, whether you're minimizing usage, maximizing the efficiency, or optimizing the supply. So, electric vehicle switching, garbage truck fleets, all these types of things, and all the way down to multiple different types of transportation systems. So there's a lot in there.
Yeah, it's funny because the other day somebody said to me, "Well, I can't afford to buy one of those new hybrid cars," and I actually used RETScreen to say, "Actually, I'm going to counter that. I think you can't afford not to buy a hybrid car." And I demonstrated based on the mileage they were traveling what their fuel consumption reduction would be. It took me about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's. I have to say, the more I play with these, and I play with them a lot, the more sort of excited I get about, all the potential and what we can do. But for the rest of today, we're going to stay within this real property section here of these facility types. And you'll see we have agricultural archetypes. We have our commercial institutional. I'm going to come back because we're going to spend most of our time there. We have individual measures. So I saw in the chat or in the question, someone was asking about building envelope, and we'll get to that within a full facility. But if you don't want to model a full facility, you can model part of a facility, or what we call individual measures. So here we're looking at just schedules or heating equipment, cooling equipment. Oh, here's building envelope. So you're asking about building envelope. So we have several just building envelope measures as an individual measure, as a if you want to think of it as a mini archetype. And then, of course, building envelopes involved in many of them. So you can see here, pumps, fans, motors, process heat, compressed air, and even solar water heater and solar air heater, for example. Let's go down to the industrial section. Again, kind of like the transportation. Sometimes people forget that there are industrial archetypes in here, and we're adding to them. So, for example, we recently added this transportation equipment auto mill and auto parts plant. And we have that both in, energy reduction, but as Stephen said, as part of the deep emissions reduction as well. So that's very pertinent for us in Ontario right now. And then if I continue down, we also have military ones. You may think these aren't necessarily relevant, but there's a lot of good ones here. For example, workshops. We also have different types of garages and warehouses. We also have hangars and so forth, things that are specific to military. But these are facilities that you don't have to work for Department of National Defense in order to use these. Anyone can use these, right?
And as long as you have helicopters to put in the hangars, you can do the helicopter hangar.
That's right. That's right. Okay, and then we have residential, of course. So let's go back to the commercial institutional, which is where we're going to spend the rest of the day. So we have all of our subtypes, our types of archetypes. They fall in the categories of education, shopping, so malls, food retail. So these are grocery stores, right? We actually just did a webinar a little while ago about the retail food sector. Food services is, restaurants and fast food and that type of thing. We have hospitals and outpatient. And you'll see when in each of these, when I click on this last selection here, this is where I'm going to select the archetype that I want. And you see, as Stephen mentioned, they're in two categories. We have the energy reduction ones with a target of 30 to 40% reduction in energy consumption, and the deep emission reductions, which have a target of 80 to 90% of emissions reductions in that archetype there. Lodging is where you have lodging is where we'll have hotels, including ones with swimming pools, and we continue to add to those all the time. Our office buildings, which I've shown many times in many of our different webinars and in our videos. We have a public building. So this is if you're looking at hockey arenas or community centers, those are there.
And some of these are pretty complex. I was involved in building some of these, and this is not a simple task to build a building. But once they're created, there's another good example. They're good examples. If you want to create your own building, you can start from scratch. Yes. You can take the archetype and modify it. But to say you want to start from scratch, I would use the archetype as a model. Just set it up. You can have 2 instances open. So to build the structure, because that's where the hard work in building the archetypes is. What's the structure we're going to use in order to properly represent reality? Then you can go in and detail it to make it look like your building.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah. In fact, I was working with my brother a couple of weekends or last summer on a weekend, and we said, well, he lives in Halifax and I live in Ontario. We said, how is and we both have older homes. How is our emissions comparatively between those areas? And we loaded the same archetype, the residential archetype, and we just adjusted it from there. And it was way faster than starting from scratch. And then, I forgot about the dishwasher or some sort of plug load or something.
There was another example that I was asked a question by somebody working in the school board saying, if we set the temperatures up in our schools by 2 degrees C, we'll let it be in the summer 2 degrees C warmer, when largely the buildings are unoccupied, what would the net impact would be across our portfolio? So that would mean we'd have to go and audit every building. No, what we did was okay, how many primary schools do you have? How many middle schools? How many secondary schools? How many offices do you have? So we basically took an archetype for each one of those. We set the schedules, we set the temperatures 2 degrees warmer in the summer, and we came up with an answer overall for their portfolio when we multiplied it by the number of buildings. So there's a great way to use the archetype to answer kind of a global question.
Yeah. Yeah, and it will give you it. And the thing about RETScreen is it will give you an actionable answer, right? And that's where I think some people get confused. Is they want, and I'm going to use air quotes, they want the right answer, right? And they think, especially us engineers like to calculate. Uh, Scientists and engineers will go to the 8th decimal place. You don't need to do that to get an actionable answer about
Yeah.
what you're going to do. And those answers, you can get to them quite quickly and accurately, but you don't need to do the hourly simulation over a whole year and that. An archetype is more than sufficient to get you pointed in the right direction.
Let's take a look at one of these, Kevin, and see what.
Yes. So I've loaded up here under public order and safety. I have a fire station. This is not one I open very often, so I thought it would be fun, and let's see what's in a fire station. So let's move over. Let's say we're looking at the fire station in Peterborough. I'm not too familiar with the town, but let's assume that there's a fire station over here. And I'm going to click on, in fact, if I went on the satellite, I could actually determine exactly where it was. Oh, maybe it's this one. And then I click on OK, or calculate rather. I had something loaded before, so I don't want to save that. And so now what RETScreen is doing, it's already finished. RETScreen is taking that archetype, taking that climate data, running the model, including the Monte Carlo analysis, the risk analysis, 500 times, 1,000 times, and we have our result. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the worksheets, not all of them.
So Kevin, I'm gonna jump to one of the questions here. Somebody said, how do you change the GHG of the electricity to use the marginal emissions, not the averages? So we can jump right into this one, right? Because we can go right to the emission page.
Sure.
Let's say we know a better number than RETScreen has, okay? So Kevin, you're gonna jump to the emission page for this fire hall on the top menu. And here we see the emission factor right now that RETScreen is running with is a 0.025, and with transmission distribution losses of 7%, 0.027. So let's say you knew that for a particular point it was 0.034. So this is exactly where you enter that value. That's going to take all the calculations on electricity within this archetype, and it's going to use the 0.034 or whatever the value you put in is. Okay, so that's the answer to the other question that's in the chat here. The other one was about building envelope, and I know you'll take a look at that for sure. So
yeah, no, that's exactly right. So this is where, so when you load it through the virtual energy analyzer, remember that important third step, the third click, was decide where you are. So when you're deciding where you are, we also know what the emissions factors are for that location. And in the case of Canada, we update those annually. So we have emissions factors for pretty much everywhere in the world that reports their emission factors, including provinces or states when applicable. So,
but if you don't like those, you can go custom.
You can go custom, and even if you want, notice we're still only on level 1, so this is a gross emission factor. If you want to start breaking down the emission factor, your electricity mix, or you're on an isolated grid, and a certain amount comes from hydro, and a certain amount comes from natural gas, or whatever, you can define and calculate your emissions factor as well, right? And level 3 even gives you a little more control, where you can actually, adjust the individual emission factors for each of the GHG gases, right?
All right.
So let's go back to the location sheet. Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
I was going to say, and I think after you do, the first thing I'd like to see is, okay, let's say this building is bigger than, this archetype is for a 600 square meter building, but maybe our building isn't that size. So exactly. You can fit that in, but that's one of the things I always like to do is to scale this building to my circumstance. Keep going there, Kevin.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to do. So perfect. So I move over to the facility worksheet, and in this the top section here is information. This is it's important to know, especially this third one under facility name. If I click on this little icon, I get this additional information about my file, including down here this user-defined section. And so I can add different ones here. So there's a fire hall, maybe it's a station number, I don't know,
So when this is
station.
useful later on, because this information, when you get to the portfolio, which is a database, you can slice and dice your portfolio according to information that's embedded in here.
Exactly. And the Net Zero Planner will automatically populate predefined fields that will appear in here, right? So that's very important to know. The next thing is down on my benchmark section, right? Remember, we've loaded an archetype. Now, the archetype is a archetypical facility, but now we might be at the place where we want to sort of make it our own. So the first thing is, like as Stephen said, what is the size of our facility? So maybe ours is, instead of 600 square meters, it's a bit bigger. It's 850. So doesn't look like much happened, but RETScreen actually recalculated all of the base and proposed case based on the reduction target, the fuel consumption, right? And if I click on this button here, which is the scaling tool, we can actually see what that means for each of the elements of my facility. So I have up here my facility size. I have the size of the archetype and the size of my facility. And I see that just a linear extrapolation, my building is 42% larger than the archetype that I've loaded, right? And so RETScreen will then calculate for each of the fuels that are used in my facility, the base case fuel consumption, cost, and emissions for each of those. So you'll see here it has the archetype and the scaled amount. So the archetype says 161 in the base case, and my scaled facility is 228,000 kilowatt hours of fuel consumption, and so on and so forth for the proposed case and the electricity and so forth. You can, if you want, adjust these exponents, right? There is a fairly large body of scholarly work and practical work about scaling laws in natures and networks and human networks. So generally, like a 3/4 power law sort of works. So the idea is, as you double the size of an animal, you don't double the amount of food it eats, right? It's a power law. So it's the same with a building. It's the same with the number of fire hydrants in this city and everything. So as a building doubles in size, its consumption doesn't necessarily double in size. So maybe let's put a 3/4 power law, but for the costs, no one's giving us a deal on the costs. I blame inflation. And so you'll see as I change these things, remember, this used to be 228, it's now 209. So it's a little bit less, right? Because I'm using that power law. And so that's one way to adjust. Another way is just to apply a straight percentage. And so just to give you an example, one of the ways you could do this is if you're modeling an existing facility, you can use your utility bills and say, take the RETScreen archetype, but then say, okay, my facility, I'm consuming 50% more. And this is a really quick way to sort of calibrate the whole model in RETScreen using the archetype as is. And if I click OK, all this data is saved. I can get back to it by clicking on this button again, or that button is also available in the on the energy worksheet. But if I click on it again, you'll see all those values that I just had when I clicked save are there. I'm going to show you one last trick before we move to the energy worksheet. If I click on this button here, the copy to user defined model, this is a way to keep these values so that they're stuck somewhere. And you'll see I've switched back over to the facility worksheet, and look right up here, this facility type is now user defined. Remember, we were in commercial institutional when we loaded it from the archetype. It's in user defined. Now when I go to the energy worksheet, I get a simplified energy worksheet that has all of my energy efficiency measures, my gas consumption before and after due to those efficiency measures, and my electrical consumption before and after due to those efficiency measures. Because this is on this energy worksheet, it's automatically available to me in the portfolio. So if I have several buildings where I'd want to use the archetype, scale them up, and analyze them in the portfolio, this is one way that you can do that. But
Kevin,
Yes.
Sorry, there's been a couple of relevant questions coming in. The first one being, how are the archetypes developed? Are these based on benchmarked facilities or the large database that you have access to at RETScreen?
Yeah, so the archetypes were developed and are continuing to be developed based on popular or common facility types. So we initially worked with the ISO on identifying several facility types common in populated areas in Ontario and developed them that way. We use multiple sources to validate them. We will use other modeling exercises. So, for example, in the United States, they had the Department of Energy release some sort of reference buildings. We'll look at those. We also then will cost them using sort of up-to-date cost information because they are fully costed, these archetypes. And then, of course, they're validated with, industry and field experts. So if we're working on the hospital archetype, we'll work with experts in energy modeling and facilities in hospitals and get them to work with us on reviewing and establishing the parameters for those archetypes. Remember, the archetypes are not your specific building. When you take an archetype and put it in your location, we're not modeling your building. We're putting the archetypical facility at that location, modeling it so that, as I said before, you can have actionable results to move forward, make a decision, and then it's up to you to adjust that.
Great. So that also answers our second question, which was can we increase the size or reduce the actual size of an archetype?
Yeah. So the size, so I showed you the quick way to load the size. And actually, this is what I wanted to show, right? So we're on this simplified model here. This is the output of the scaling tool when I paste it. But if I go back to the facility and instead of user defined, I go back to where I was before, which is commercial institutional, and I come back to energy, here is my archetype. So I haven't lost anything. So that's important to realize is RETScreen can keep multiple analysis types in the same file. So I had a user-defined facility type, and now I have a commercial institutional facility type. And so what this is the archetypical, meaning non-scaled archetype for the fire station in Peterborough. And I won't go through too many details because these are all sort of published on our website and stuff. But for example, I know there were some questions about a building envelope. So if I go into the garage, this is the building envelope. And here you'll see there's multiple measures that we're doing. So we have the schedule, we have some upgrade of the walls and windows and the roof, and the floor below grade and natural air infiltration and so forth. And RETScreen will calculate what the savings are due to the changes there. And if I get back out of this and I go back to the include measure page, which is what I had before, I can see that for those measures, I have a 9.2 year payback. And if I want to adjust them, I can iteratively go into them, adjust them, and so forth. And remember also,
the question actually referred to the fact that many building envelope measures have a long payback, but that may not be the case. Another thing to think about too is if you're upgrading roof insulation, if you're having to replace a roof, it's the marginal cost that you want to consider for the upgrade as opposed to, the energy project shouldn't have to pay for replacing a roof insulation at end of life. But if you want to use more insulation and basically accommodate more insulation in that roof, then the marginal cost for doing that would be what you would bear. And that actually can create a very attractive payback in many situations on a marginal basis.
Yeah. And notice in RETScreen, the terminology we use is incremental initial costs. Now, if you last week you installed the roof and this week you want to rip it off and install a new one for something, okay, your incremental cost is going to be the full cost of a brand new roof, right?
Yeah.
But if your roof is 30 years old and is causing you lots of problems and needs to be replaced anyways, you have to buy a roof no matter what. So the incremental cost is what is the difference, what is the delta between what you have to spend anyways and the more energy efficient difference, right? And so that is what the payback period is calculated on, is on those incremental costs.
Kevin, what if you're wondering about in this building, maybe the use of a heat pump in place of the space heating system, right? So what's the space heating system in this building right now? Let's have a look at what's there.
So let's go. So the way I do it, so I go on this left menu, I'm in the heating section, I click on space heating, and I see that I'm switching from a natural gas heated system that's 72% efficient up to 82% efficient. So moving to an efficient boiler or efficient furnace, right?
And there's the incremental price for doing that switch.
And the incremental price is there.
But what if we wanted to see, well, let's just change it to electrically heated building. I mean, right. I'm not sure that we would always do that, but let's give it a go and see what it looks like.
So let's see. So I already have listed in my types of fuels, I already have electricity. So I'm going to click on electricity. I already have an electricity price here, and I'll show you in a moment where we get that from. And now we need to change the efficiency, the seasonal efficiency of my electricity system. So are we talking about resistive heaters?
Yeah, let's go with a resistive heater, which has a nominal efficiency of 100%.
100%. So now we've changed this to 100%, and let's go back to see what we have. And now we have a well, actually, we didn't take a metric, right? We didn't take a metric that we want to measure. So let's take a metric. So let's look at how much carbon. Yeah, let's do CO2. So the easiest way to do that is to go to the emissions worksheet. So I'm going to go to the emissions worksheet in the menu up here. Remember, we changed our value to 0.34, right? So right now, using resistance heating, we have a reduction of 25.5 tons of CO2.
Yep. All right. So let's go back to what it was with gas and see what the emissions would be, right?
Let's do that. Let's go back to space heating. Let's go back to gas. And this was 82% efficient, right? Now let's go right back to the emissions worksheet. And, not 25.5, 15.7.
So we save an incremental or an additional 10 tons of CO2 in this relatively small building by moving to electric heat.
Now, what about a heat pump, though?
Well,
so let's go to a heat pump. And so we go back to electricity, but now instead of 100% efficiency, heat pumps would have maybe a COP of what, 2?
Well, if you're wondering, let's go to the efficiency table. So if you click into the help there, Kevin, click on seasonal efficiency, the word, and click to the typical seasonal efficiencies of heating systems table, right? And so now we can get basically the seasonal efficiencies of an air or a ground source heat pump. So yeah, so Kevin, you were talking COP, coefficient of performance, but a COP of 2 is like a seasonal efficiency of 200% or an efficiency of 200%.
Yes. So let's use 200%. So now we go to, instead of 82, we go to 200%. We're going to leave the cost as is right now because we're not doing an economic analysis. We're going to go back. In fact, instead of going to the emission, I'm going to show something that I use a lot. If you go to the dashboard is this floating window that gives you an option to look at all of these sort of outputs or calculated results in various forms. So let's look at the GHG emissions. So here we have, if I mouse over here, 26.4 tons of CO2 reduced. Now let's, you know what? I forget what that was with resistive heated. So let's just change this 100. Now look at this graph. It's automatically going to change. Oh, this black bar went up a little bit. Now it's 25.5. So this is a dynamic system. Let's go back to the oil heater. Let's do 82%. You can see that this is dynamically changing, as is all the other outputs in the model here. So this floating window that you'll find on the energy worksheet, it's called dashboard. It's really useful for doing this type of sort of iterative sort of scenario analysis that we're doing.
So Kevin, I think it's time to give folks a chance to maybe try this out themselves. What do you think?
Yeah,
I'm sure we could go on all day with this, but but let's give chance or folks a chance to play with it a little bit. So what I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to grab the screen here and just display that. my screen up here. So if you've got RETScreen installed, what you're going to do is basically do what Kevin just did in to some extent. You're going to open the up RETScreen. You're going to go to the virtual energy analyzer. You're going to go and pick an archetype of your choice. So in this case, I picked the community center, right? And I'm going to pick the 30 to 40% energy reduction example. The reason I say go with the 30 to 40% energy is it will likely not have a heat pump in its proposed case, right? So it'll likely have gas or maybe electric heat. So let's go with the 30 to 40% energy reduction archetype for a building of your choice, right? Then you're going to go to the emissions page, or you could use the dashboard like Kevin did, and you're going to record the emissions with the existing proposed case, which will likely be some kind of fossil fuel. Then you're going to change, say, the natural gas boiler to an electric heat pump with the seasonal efficiency of 200%. You're going to go back to the emissions page and take a look at the reduction or in carbon at that point and see how much difference that heat pump has made over the conventional fossil fuel heating system. Okay? We'll give you a couple minutes to do that if you've got it open. It's hard to know where everybody is at, so.
We've got a hand up from.
Yeah, Hugh, you have a question?
Hey, Steve, can you hear me okay?
I can, Hugh.
One time you had shown me where I could see water treatment plant as an archetype, and I cannot for the life of me find
I
it.
believe it's under services. Let me just
Okay.
let me pick it up here myself, and I'll see if I can find that for you. Yeah,
I got it. I got it.
you got it. It's under services. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so Hugh works in a, if I can just reveal a little bit, works with in Kingston, and he's involved with the wastewater and water treatment plant. So that's the building that interests him is a water or wastewater treatment plant. So he's going to try out this example on that. Actually, one of the questions, Kevin, in here is a question I have, and I probably should know the answer, but I don't. So someone asked, is there a list of archetypes that are out there? Is this listed anywhere, all the different archetypes? Obviously, you can get to it by going through the menus and navigating, but I don't know if is that documented anywhere?
Yeah, so in the help manual, there is a page that lists all of the archetypes. So
so I'm going to go in here. So, and you're going into the help here, right?
yeah,
And I'm going to go to.
let's click that. Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, archetypes. So here's all the archetypes down here, all the various different archetypes, right?
yeah. So if you click on commercial institutional,
yeah,
you should get the subcategories.
Yeah, there we go. There's all the different archetypes.
There they are. Yeah.
See,
yeah.
I should have checked the help. I learned something today. Nathaniel, there you go. There's the answer to that question. I'm just kind of looking at the list here. Yeah, and I don't believe there is a model for modeling hydrogen as of yet, correct, Kevin?
You can include hydrogen as a fuels.
Okay.
If you go to on the energy worksheet under the fuels and schedules, you can pick hydrogen from there. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Aisha was asking about I didn't see the full question about electrolyzers. So you could model an electrolyzer in terms of an electricity load within a building, because obviously it's a device with a defined load. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you mean like as a user-defined load?
It could be a piece of process equipment. If I go into here, I can go into energy, and I could define then process electricity. That would be how I would see that one. And then I could define. I could do it as either the kilowatt hours consumed or the load itself in kilowatts, the percentage, and then the hours per day it operates, and that would give you the actual load within the building. Now, in terms of the output, which is hydrogen, no, it's not modeling that, but it will model it as a load. But to your point, Kevin, you could go under your, under your fuels and schedules. There is a way to actually look at hydrogen as a fuel, and then the actual energy content and such will. I'm going to find it here. Looking at
use the search.
Yeah,
use the search.
I always thank you. There we go. Yeah, we'll go hydrogen. And so we do have hydrogen as a fuel. And then you would have to obviously work $$. Per kilogram and know the efficiency of your equipment, whether it be a fuel cell, right? Because you could enter that in there, right? Or as a more so as an engine, or burning it in a boiler or other kind of combustion system.
Yeah. I also see a question from Anonymous about how do you keep the existing windows and add insulators and not consider the assumption you would need new windows? How to show the cost savings in the bottom energy.
So then you would have to, if you go into the building envelope, let's say
Yes.
you've got office common area here on the screen. So what we would have to do is we would have to figure out how that change, what that change would do to either the U value or the solar heat gain. But I'd basically be looking at changing the U value based on, this is the thermal on the edge, correct? Yeah.
Resistivity, yeah.
Yeah, resistivity. And when you say the
conductivity.
Connectivity, yeah. So there's actually a window tool in here that we can use to create, and I have to remember where my window tool went.
Click the little icon, the little window icon right above the.
That's right. It's right here. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So we can create a new window, and we can work with then basically the center glazing, the rated window. So it allows us to deal with different characteristics of the window in that way, and we can build up a window which we could then use in the yellow cells in the envelope section.
Yeah, but I think in general, RETScreen does not make the assumption that those windows are being replaced. I mean, those changes in U value or the solar heat gain coefficient could be due to an awning, planting bushes or trees outside.
That's right.
It could be anything. There is no built-in assumption that if you want to do it, you have to replace it wholesale.
Yeah, and that's why if we take a look in here, that's why in you have to put the new values in and the cost. So if to get to the new values, you have to replace the window, the cost is going to be a lot higher. But if you can upgrade the existing window through some other mechanism, your cost is going to be lower, and this will be the effective result in terms of the thermal characteristics of the window. Yeah, I managed to delete that window, which I didn't really want to do. I
think you have to go into it and then click on it, and then click on the there Windows properties.
Yeah, window properties. Yeah, there we go. That
it will load it up, and then you have to go to window properties, I think.
Yeah, and get rid of that window. What I want to do. Anyway, not to worry.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So everybody had a chance to play with a little bit and to do that carbon reduction? Any questions about that little activity? So I think, Kevin, you basically demonstrated it's a matter of going in here, and actually I've got hydrogen here, which I probably want to change. So I can go back to my natural gas. 30 cents a kilogram for hydrogen. I don't know where that would sit, but I can go natural gas, and there'd probably be two natural gases in here. One will be per cubic meter per pound per gigajoule. There we go, 30 cents a cubic meter, which if that's a little bit out of date. So then we go to our heating equipment, right? Before we do that, I'm going to go take a look on my emission screen. So here I've got 15 tons, right? I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to change this to then electricity, and I'm going to go to 200%, right? And I can then move back to my emission screen. I see 25.6. So in this case, it's just a matter of knowing where to go to look for those particular items. And, and I like your, I probably don't use this one enough, the dashboard, though, to be able to keep an eye on different things in terms of when you're doing that kind of what if analysis. So there's our emissions right there. Yeah. Okay.
Stephen, do you want to explain for somebody why do we use 200% efficiency? I know you did go through that a little bit earlier. But...
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, any kind of refrigeration equipment, the sort of the most technical way to rate it is usually a coefficient of performance. And the coefficient of performance is defined as, right? So let's say we say a coefficient of performance of 2. What that means is a heat pump with a coefficient of performance of 2, for every unit of electricity you purchase, you can deliver 2 units of heat. All right. If it's a COP of 3, it would be 3 units of heat delivered for 1 unit of electricity purchased, units maybe being kilowatt hours. Now, in RETScreen, because of the fact we're dealing with fuels which have an efficiency less than 100% typically, in the heating section, heating equipment section, we represent the COP of 2, right, as an efficiency of 200%. What it means is you get 200% of the energy out that you put in, whereas with the gas heating system, in this case, in the base case, you only get 72% of the energy out that you put in as fuel. So it's just another way to describe it. If we were looking at cooling equipment, then in fact we actually do deal in terms of coefficient of performance, right, or what's otherwise known as the seasonal energy efficiency ratio, BTU per watt hour. But in cooling, we deal with the COP directly, but because of the fact that heating is often we're often dealing with fuels that are less than 100%, we really don't talk about the COP for a fuel of 0.72, but that's what it would be, right? So that's the reason right there. So if somebody says the COP of the heat pump is 2, then the efficiency is 200%. Now, the seasonal efficiency corresponds to the seasonal COP. Okay, and the seasonal COP is over the course of the heating season. It's not just an instantaneous, the maximum value, it's over the course of the heating season. In a gas furnace, you often see on the side of it AFUE, annual fuel utilization efficiency, and that's the closest thing that you can pull off a label to the seasonal efficiency of that device. Okay, let's see any other. All right, Kevin, I think we've got to move on here. We got a little bit of a journey to go, and I'll keeping an eye on these chats and things. So okay, so at this point, I'm going to go back to our slide deck just for a few slides. Kevin, you're going to explain to us essentially, what the philosophy and the framework is that's used, and what's the procedure that you use in actually developing a low carbon portfolio, and then I'm just going to look ahead. Then we're actually going to walk through these things in RETScreen, and we're going to do it. First of all, Kevin will work through it very quickly, show us the result, and then he'll loop back and say, let's do it again for a slightly different building, and you'll get to follow us through it. So Kevin, just a few minutes. Can you just give us a quick description of the process overall?
Sure, yeah. So this is our portfolio decarbonization framework, and we developed it by looking at sort of what industry has done, what are sort of the standard steps, and what needs to be done in order to arrive at a concrete and coherent net zero plan. It's not enough to say, oh, we're going to do net zero and we're save all our energy and turn off the lights. It needs to be quite deeper than that, right? As everyone knows. So the first step. And so this circle, you'll see later, are the exact steps that we're going to follow in the software. And the first one is to establish what are you comparing yourself against? As you said at the beginning, Stephen, is what's your benchmark? What are your reference GHG emissions for your portfolio? And what is that reference year, and what is your target relative to that? Are you achieving to do a 50% reduction? Are you achieving 90% full net zero? And by when? By 2030, by 2050, by 2025? So those all will have a material impact on your net zero portfolio. The next thing is to establish your energy and your baseline energy and GHG emissions. And so you need to establish your baseline year, and we're going to calculate the base case energy consumption and the GHG emissions. And we're going to choose the GHG emission factor for electricity. I saw there were some questions in the chat about that, and we'll get about electrification and grid a little later. And in fact, that's number 3, is calculate the impact of a cleaner electricity grid, and to select the emission factor for that cleaner electricity grid. So we have an emission factor at the beginning, and we have an emission factor or an evolving emission factor as we move towards net zero over a number of years, right? And those emission factor and that progression make a difference in what we can do. So step 4 is very simple. Is in your portfolio, are you getting rid of any facilities? Are you disposing of any facilities? If so, you can remove them. RETScreen gives you the opportunity to remove them or to isolate them in your portfolio as well. And so it's RETScreen will calculate the impact of what we call sort of real property consolidation or divestment, and you choose whether to include them in your net zero plan or not. So now we've set everything up, and now in step 5 is where the net zero planning tool will use the archetypes. Actually, they'll use our deep carbon retrofit archetypes, and this is where we do our energy efficiency measures. So we're going to evaluate the projected impact of all the energy efficiency actions that we're going to take. We are going to use the archetypes in RETScreen, and this is where you engage with the high emitters or the facilities that are really have a high intensity to drive those emissions reductions. And then as part of our energy efficiency measures, there's the electrification of heating. As we all know, heating is very often done using fuels, but electrification of heating, especially in areas where the emissions factor, the electricity emissions factor is quite low, can be a very important contributor to the overall net zero targets that you're trying to hit. And then you have a chance to say, okay, I've done sort of as much as I can in my facility. What about adding renewables? So these could be photovoltaic panels, for example. It could be parking lot canopies. It could be ground mounted, could be roof mounted, whatnot. But to provide some of that electricity using renewables. And then what you can't achieve on site, you can choose to get renewables off site. So to purchase renewables as well. And then, step 9 is then whatever's left over, are you willing to go out onto the market and buy carbon offsets to achieve your net zero or GHG reduction goals, right? And step 10 is in there because coming right back to the beginning, what Stephen was talking about is that if you're not tracking and reporting your progress, you don't really know what's happening to your facility. You don't know if you're actually following this net zero plan. And so that RETScreen's that performance analysis module, as Stephen mentioned, measurement and verification and all those tools, analytics, the weather and all that, allows you to track correctly the impact of your net zero plan, of the actions that you've taken, right? And yeah, this is an ongoing step, and you'll see in the graphic there's an arrows all around it, because after you've done your progress tracking and reporting, the next thing is saying, okay, now what's my reference? Now what's my new target? So suppose you had a 60% reduction target by a certain date. You track it, and then what is it after that 60%? Are you at 80? Are you going net zero? Are you doing a positive energy production? So negative emissions and those types of things are in there. And okay. So, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, so when you're finished, I'm going to do a slight deviation on what we plan to do, right? Just for in the essence of time, but you finish what you're going to say, and then we'll move on.
I'm finished. Yep.
That's good. Okay. So, whoops, I went the wrong way there, folks. Sorry about that. So basically, we're going to work through a set of inputs. Kevin's going to walk us through those. And the change here, Kevin, is that we're only going to do this once. Okay. All right. So we're going to work through it. So you pick which one you want to work through, and we'll do that. So folks, you get ready. We've got RETScreen open. You're going to follow Kevin through this whole thing. We're going to start from scratch on RETScreen. He's going to start off a fresh RETScreen. We're going to go into fresh. And then eventually we're going to develop these outputs, right? And in fact, there's more than one page of inputs, and there's lots more in the output side too. So that's what we're going to do in the next probably, 40 30 to 40 minutes as a group. You're all going to follow Kevin through this. We're just going to go through it once. We originally thought we could go through it quickly and then have you follow us the second time, but I think it'll work out better to do it the other way. Now, before I go any further, what I'm going to do is explain to you what we're going to do. So basically, you're in a municipality. You have a variety of buildings. You're tasked with creating a preliminary net zero plan. You're going to use RETScreen to do it, and we're going to walk through this together. Now, before Kevin jumps into anything here, I want to jump back to one thing, his overall framework on slide 18, right? Because Kevin, you talk about energy efficiency measures. Whoops. Stop moving my mouse. Energy efficiency measures, electrification of heating. So what I want to do is I want to show you how the archetypes, the deep carbon archetypes in RETScreen, how they set themselves up. Because what Kevin will end up doing as we walk through this is we're going to pull a lot of these archetypes in. It's going to do a lot of stuff, but I just want to give you a glimpse of what it's going to do here. So I'm going to open up RETScreen before Kevin leads us through this. And I'm going to go back to my home screen, and you can follow me through this if you want. And I'm going to click on Virtual Energy Analyzer, right? And I'm going to go back to my fire station again. It doesn't really matter which one I pick, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to not the 30 to 40% archetype. I'm going to do the 80 to 90% carbon archetype. I'm going to pick fire station. And there's a distinct difference here. I like to call these the smart archetypes, and you'll see why in a second they're smart. And you'll also then see once Kevin gets in there, the inputs are going to ask us questions, and you'll see how those answers to our questions are going to be used and how RETScreen works with this archetype. So I'm just going to accept this here, and I'm not going to save any changes. RETScreen is really good at not letting you lose data. I can honestly say I've never lost data other than if I answer the question wrong. So that's my fault. Yeah. Even when the power goes off and your computer goes down, RETScreen seems to be able to save your day. Okay, so in order to show you this, I'm going to move over. This is obviously what we were looking at before. I'm going to go to the energy tab here along the top, right? And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, okay? And in the descriptive piece underneath the include table, it goes through a whole description of a logical process that's executed when it opens up this archetype. I could take this archetype and I could open it in a different place in the country where there were different carbon factors, where there's different temperatures, and it would give me a different building here. It would look different. It would look basically the same, but it would have a different configuration in order to meet the goals that were established down here in terms of reducing the carbon. This will make more sense when we go through the process with Kevin, but suffice it to say, this isn't just a matter of RETScreen opening a file and going, okay, there you go, there's a file. No, it's going to make some decisions. Kevin's going to show us how we influence the decisions about electric heat or how much PV to put on there or those sorts of things, okay? So after the session, your homework, everybody who's going to use this, is go back, open an archetype, and read, right, that descriptive piece at the bottom, because it will really help you to understand the smarts that are behind these archetypes. Kevin?
Yeah,
over to you.
Absolutely, thanks. Okay, let me just load up here. No, not load, share. Got it. So everyone see my RETScreen? Okay, so
yeah.
I'm going to go through this. I'm going to elaborate step by step what I'm doing so that those of you who are deciding if you want to follow along, you can. So the first thing I'm going to do is on this file homepage, I'm going to click on this My Portfolio button. And while I'm there, I see this dialog that pops up that explains to me visually what a portfolio is. So a portfolio is a collection of multiple individual RETScreen files that you can add to over time and as your portfolio changes. And it aggregates and collects all of that information into one analysis. So I'm going to click on this My Portfolio, and what it does is it brings me right to this area on the file Open page. And if I go to New, I have a bunch of options. For those of you who aren't aware, if you're, as Stephen said, bringing data into RETScreen, here's a bunch of different connectors and automators that we have built in as part of our RETScreen Connect API. And we have some examples, but we're going to start with a blank project. So on File Open, in the My Portfolio section, I'm going to click on Blank Project, the blank briefcase. I'm not going to save any of these changes. And I have a blank portfolio. Great, that's where I wanted to start. So what I'm going to do is, we said we're going to be a municipality, right? So I was actually going to do Kingston, and I had a water treatment plant in there, but I want to keep this interesting. So I'm going to move that to Peterborough. So let's click on the net zero plan. And I get that first dialogue that Stephen was mentioning. So here on this dialogue, I'm going to choose which facility types I want to include in my net zero plan, in my net zero plan portfolio, right? And so moving top to bottom, the first thing is we give it a name. So net zero plan, that's a perfectly fine name. Our default location is our lab, where RETScreen is sort of developed and based just outside Montreal. But let's change this to Peterborough. So I click on the globe map. I'm colorblind. I can see that very well. So I'm going to go to here. Okay.
Yeah,
so here's
that too.
Peterborough. I'm going to go to Peterborough, and let's say that our project is in Peterborough.
And just one thing about if you zoom out there a little bit, Kevin, the location you put, whenever you pick when you're within feasibility or the archetypes, when you pick a location on the map, it associates a close or nearby climate data station. So that's the station at the airport here, just southwest of Peterborough. And that's the granularity of the climate data that's being used. In performance analysis, it's a little more granular, but that's the climate data that's going to be used in this analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one reason that's important, and the same thing with your emissions factor, it's based on where you're located. I mentioned this because if anyone's doing projects that are sort of near a provincial or US border, make sure that you have the right climate data and emissions factor. You don't want to be doing emissions factors for New York State if you're in Ontario. So I'm going to click on paste, right? I have now my location, my climate, my data location, and my facility location. And I want all of my projects to be like this. So I'm going to click on this little button here, which is copy to all. Yes, I want to copy. And now you'll see the second one here, which is called archetypes. We're in the default section, is also now Peterborough. So I'm not interested in doing this for the school board. I want to do it for the town. So let's go and let's pick that hockey arena that we had before.
And you'll see there's no choice of energy versus carbon archetypes here, emissions, because the only ones it's looking at are the low or the 80 to 90% emission reduction archetypes.
Well, yes, as a rule, there is a section where we can force it, but I'll show that in a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have now this is my default. Okay, so and I've done copy to all. So now what I'm going to do is now let's start building our mini portfolio for Peterborough. We're not going to do the whole municipality, but we're going to do some of them. So let's say that Peterborough has 2 hockey rinks. That makes sense? Probably.
Yeah.
At least. Okay, so we have the location. Make sure that your data is similar to mine. Commercial, institutional, public building, the arena hockey archetype. And we have 2 of those. Let's also add, this is a municipality. Now you'll see when I click plus, look at everything's the same. Peterborough, hockey, all of this is the same because we put it in our default. So it saves me time by setting that default properly at the beginning. And the next thing I want to do is
you put an office building,
a community center.
Oh, community center, yeah.
I'm going to do it. Let's say we're doing one community. Let's say we're doing the north part of the city. I'm going to click plus again. Let's do an office tower. Let's do an office building. Let's do a mid-rise office building. Maybe around City Hall. And let's do one of those. And last thing, let's add one more. Let's go to, let's do services. Let's do that wastewater treatment plant. All right. So this is going to be my net zero plan portfolio. I have 2 hockey arenas, 1 community center, 1 medium office, and 1 wastewater treatment plant. Okay, so I hope everyone's been able to follow along. I'm going to click on Next. And now I'm in the portfolio decarbonization framework. You'll notice step 1, step 2, step 3 down the left side, then up and on the right side. Those are the same 10 steps that we just discussed in that portfolio decarbonization framework. So what's our reference emissions for those 5 buildings? And when was that reference? So if you have this information, I don't, but if the town was tracking their emissions, they may say, oh, this is 2,000 tons, and we measured that back in 2016. And we want to reduce that by 90% by 2050, right? I actually don't know what the reference was, so I'm not going to guess, but I do want to have a reduction from the base case using those archetypes in 2050. That's it, step 1. Step 2, what's my baseline energy emissions? So you'll see here, I'm using the archetypical facilities. Those are precisely the archetypes that Stephen just showed, those deep emission reduction archetypes. That's what's going to be used. So if you remember, when we were looking at those archetypes, we had the base case and the proposed case. So we're talking here the base case. What is the base case energy or the baseline energy and GHG emissions? And remember, for electricity, what emissions factor do we want for electricity? So that question was very relevant because it's going to come up a lot. Do we want to use what is already in RETScreen in the emissions analysis worksheet? So what we saw, that exact same data that we saw. Remember when we look at the fire stations, 25.5. So it would have that information here for all of the archetypes. Or we can also use projected data. So since we're in Canada, we have access to excellent data through the National Inventory Report that publishes projected emissions as well. And when's my baseline year? When are we comparing ourselves to? So let's say that it was, we're comparing ourselves to last year, and our target is to do a 90% reduction by 2050, right? So this is how we do that. A 90% reduction based on this year's values. Next step is, okay, so between 2023 and 2050, there's a bunch of years, right? There's 27 years. What do we do about the electricity grid during that period? Do we want to assume that the grid will be zero emission? Do we want to have a specific emissions factor? So that question about emissions factors, this is where we would put it. Or again, do we want to use that database in RETScreen? So do all the heavy lifting for us. So let's use that projected emissions factor for the Ontario grid that's in RETScreen. Do we want to dispose of any facilities? I did not put in any in my previous page. So I'm not going to include a group. What RETScreen will do, it will remove those from the net zero plan and put them in a separate category. I don't want to do that. Step 5 is the easiest step of all. What energy efficiency measures do you want to do? And as Stephen said, we use the emissions reduction 80 to 90%. So there's nothing to do there. We leave that there. The next step is electrification of heating.
This is where we're actually sort of seeding or driving that logic that happens when we bring that archetype in.
Yes. So as Stephen mentioned, we're adding intelligence, especially to those deep emission reduction archetypes, where Stephen said it will look at where the emissions factor is and change the heating system depending what it is. And as we know with decarbonization, this is a very strong driver of, or can be a strong driver of decarbonization. And so RETScreen gives you the opportunity. It says, well, maybe I'm downtown, they're not going to do a ground source heat pump. But air source heat pump and an electric boiler, electric furnace certainly is permitted, and so you can do that. Notice here, if I say no, I don't want to do any electrification of heating, that the energy efficiency measures switch back to the energy reduction targets of 30 to 40%, not the deep emission reduction. So if you want to do that net zero plan, electrification of heating is a part of that. Now, what RETScreen will do is using that archetype, it will look at the loads and it will say, it will, and we worked with the ISO on this, is making sure that you have some sort of level of control to manage your peak load for your heating system. So, for example, if you wanted, that the peak accounted for 70%, you could put in the natural gas would be 30%, and then RETScreen will take care of the rest. RETScreen also calculates the energy consumption in total, and with this net zero plan, we have the opportunity to say, once you've done everything you want to your building, is it okay if the electricity consumption is greater than what it was initially? And here we're saying it's going to be equal to, it's 100% the same, but we could adjust that to say, no, we want to be below, or we want to be higher.
Again, that's going to constrain its options when it comes to figuring out what it's going to put in here.
Exactly. And all those options, then it's like a waterfall. Those options then tumble down to here. It's like, okay, if you're not going to do this electrification, or you're doing all this electrification, what about your on-site renewables? Well, we know that we don't have the ability to put on the ground, for example. It has to be on the roof, or whatnot. So RETScreen will allows you to tweak and calibrate what you want. And that's on-site renewables. Now I'm going to scroll up to the top. Same thing with off-site renewables. And off-site renewables, we just say, do we want them or not? And how much are we paying for them, right? How much are we paying for that electricity rate? And then the last item is, there's any leftover emissions to be taken care of to get us to this target that we wanted. Are we willing to purchase carbon offsets? And then so you can say yes or no, and how much of that remaining are you willing to buy, and what the price is. So maybe it's $30 by the time you're ready to go with the project. And then step 10 is performance tracking. Well, there's nothing to do yet. We don't have the data, but we put this in here as a reminder. And when you click this button, it will bring you some information about what the next steps could be. The rest of this dialogue here are some financial parameters, some emissions, if you're going to have a carbon shadow price or sell any of your emissions credits, and what do you want to be included in the graphs. And that's it. So I'm going to leave it like this. So I will leave it on screen for another minute or two. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That way people have questions about this.
Trying to monitor the chat and the questions. I think we're okay there. Megan, did you see anything that's popped up? There was a question about exergy analysis, which is kind of a side, but RETScreen really doesn't do exergy analysis per se.
Yeah, there's a couple questions I flagged to bring up at the end of the session.
Sure.
If we've got time.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. Like, we can probably get this one out in about 15 minutes, and that'll give us the little 15-minute period at the end too. Okay, Kevin, that should be enough, right? 15 minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there's no questions directly related to this, let's click on this calculate, right? And so for calculate, RETScreen is going to load, I'm going to click back, going to load each of these archetypes that we selected on the first screen, run them through, take these parameters, run it through the algorithm, and I'll show you in a minute the algorithm if you're interested, and then put them in a portfolio and generate the various graphs and data that we need for it. So I'm going to click OK. It says, do you want to continue? So this is a small portfolio, only 5 facilities, but you could do this for a campus, you could do this for a whole town, you could do this for a school board, and iterate on it. So that was successful. So we have here all of our facilities, and if we go on the map, we see that sure enough, they're all in Peterborough, so they're all using the same climate data. Remember when I said that the facility worksheet, that section above where we did the scaling, was where we had the photo and the information, and I show those custom columns. These are all the custom columns. So when you run the net zero planning tool, we add a column called heating system, PV roof, PV roof size and output, and percentage, how much carbon offsets, and so on and so forth, so that you can, if you want, sort of isolate or deal individually with these. So, for example, we can see that 3 of these went for a electric boiler, the arena, both arenas and the medium office, but the community center, it would manage to hit its target using air source heat pump. And you can see, but no photovoltaics, right? So these are really interesting sort of results just by running the net zero planning tool. I'm going to switch over to the plan table here. I'm going to close these 2 sections just so we can see. So here we have a benchmark analysis.
So just actually what you did there, Kevin, was you just hit those arrows so it collapsed the empty sections in the index on the left, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just to give myself a little more room here, so I'm not looking at the bottom of the screen. Yeah. So let's look at we're doing carbon reduction. So let's look at carbon. So this is carbon intensity, so tons of CO2 per square meter. So you can see where it used to be the base case and the proposed case. So the base case is 180 tons for the community center, proposed case 118. And of course, the table at the bottom has all the information that we need, including our target, which was 90%. So yeah, we can look at what the emissions reductions were. But I like this waterfall graph, which is the emissions. So this was my baseline. So this was taken from the base case of all the archetypes, right? And then in the aggregate, the cleaner electricity grid accounted for 470 or 24% of the reduction. Energy efficiency measures took almost half of the reduction, just under 1,000 tons of CO2, and the electrification of heating, which was 17%. And there's a little bit for on-site renewables, a little bit more for off-site, and some carbon offsets, which looks like we had to offset 150 tons for our whole portfolio. Now, what's interesting is, and if you've seen my other videos, you will see this. I like to do this is, so the energy efficiency, so the stuff that we did not clean the electricity grid, but the stuff that we did for our portfolio were energy efficiency measures and electrification of heating and these other items here. So the energy efficiency measures were 49%, and the electrification of heating was 17% of the reduction. But let's look at it from a cost perspective. Remember, we put $30 a ton. Energy efficiency measures are 62% of the cost, and the electrification of heating was 29. So it went from, what was it, 16 to 29 or 19 to 29? 16, 17.
Yeah.
16% of the reduction, but 29% of the cost, which is a bit typical, but depend where you are and what your specific costs are. But this data now is yours. So for those of you who have been following along, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. 1, go back to File and click on Save. That way you have this file and you can play with it later. Okay, if you click Save, it'll ask you to save it as a .retp file. Okay, and the second thing is, now that we have this net zero plan, we can run a scenario analysis on it. So if I re-click on this net zero plan button, all of the same outputs and all the same inputs that I had before are there. So I can very quickly say, well, look, we heard we're not allowed to buy carbon offsets. We have to do everything ourselves, and 2050 won't cut it. We have to do it 2100. We have to do 100% reduction. Now let's see what happens. And if you click this, I'm going to give this a different name. Net Zero Plan 100, I'm calling it. Right? So I put that 100. I've taken off my carbon offsets, and let's click OK. I'm permitting myself to do this because it's a quick portfolio. There, it's done. See, that's how quick it is, right? So now I have my original portfolio and my second one, right? And if I go back to my plan, I have my original portfolio and my second one called Net Zero Plan. And let's look, do I hit my 100% emissions? Oh, 98.3. Remember, I was not allowed to buy carbon offsets on this one. So I'm buying a lot more offsite renewables. Anyways, these are a lot of the ways that you can kind of slice and dice and analyze your thing and progress over time. I did promise that I would show the sort of what's happening behind the scenes. If you kind of want a reminder, and I often do, what that framework is, we put this button called framework up a bunch of places. So here's that button. And if you click on the question mark at the bottom, you're going to get a description, basically what I described to you before. But for each of those steps, what's included, right? That's the main portfolio decarbonization network. If I go to the net zero plan and click on the help button here, I hope you're getting the idea that clicking on that help button is extremely useful.
Yeah.
I spent an hour yesterday looking at it, right? So look, there's a lot of information here, but it's a lot of the similar ones that we just saw. For example, if you click on this portfolio decarbonization network, we get that text that we just looked at. But there's some interesting links in here. So virtual energy analyzer, or VEA, calculation steps for the deep emission reduction archetypes. This is exactly what Stephen was talking about before, right? So these are the steps that it goes through. A lot of this is actually written in that text, but then we've also added this algorithm on what's happening when you are doing that electrification of heat. We're first switching, we're looking at the emissions. Have we met our target? Have we done the most of the roof area? Okay, now let's switch to an air source heat pump. And so there's quite a lot going on. We've sort of boiled it down to two buttons, a forward button and a calculate button, but there's a lot going on in the background there.
Yeah, that's when these were first released, that was the thing that really opened my eyes, that this isn't just an example file. There's a lot of logic behind this and thinking. And even if you're working within Ontario, there's differences in weather and also fuels available in the grid and things like that. But certainly if you're working across the country, it can make a big difference, the configurations that this will deliver.
Yeah. And remember also that these are individual RETScreen files, meaning that the files, although we've been working in the RETScreen feasibility analysis using the archetypes, there is also the performance analysis. So we can bring in utility consumption data into these files. And then once you have that, there's this whole edit portfolio where you can start adding information. You can see that we already have some information here. You can also, start doing your own regression analysis, automated regression in bulk for the whole portfolio to start to calibrate. Because sometimes the question I get is, okay, I did my net zero plan. Now what's the next step? Well, the next step is start measuring it. How close are you? You can start using those scaling factors that I saw. You can open them up and scale them. You can calibrate those models. So instead of scaling, you can actually go in and put in your utility bills and actually see, oh, my building envelope is a little bit bigger here. Oh, we don't have 5 pumps, we only have 1, or we don't have any pumps, and start making it your own.
So you can access that file. Just for some folks that haven't seen the portfolio piece before, if you just double click on any one of these, it's going to go and access that underlying file. And there's lots more data in the underlying file that's actually visible from the portfolio level. It all contributes to what you can see from the portfolio, but now you can go and manipulate that. As you said, Kevin, any one of these files is a container for other types of analysis. So right now, this is the underlying archetype, and if you go to energy, you'll see all the gory details there. But let's say you wanted to put performance analysis data in here. You could go back to a facility here, right? And you could click on all, right? And now across the top, we see data and analytics, okay? This is where we can go and pull in the real-time data, the billing data, the interval data, and do the analytics on that, right? So there's a whole container for, like, it's a project management tool, really, because you've got your portfolio, which has your sort of your targets and your goals, you know, properly set out. Now we can go in and start to work underneath this and build out all the other bits and pieces that we need to make this work. So
absolutely, yeah. And anything you change here, actually, let's go into the space heater. Let's see. Yep, it did do an electricity. It did do an air source heat pump 200%, right? So
yeah.
that this is on one of those facilities. So so yeah, there's a lot in here. And if I change anything here, water treatment plant, I'm going to put ISO and save it. Now, look at this facility name, wastewater treatment plant, has a little pencil beside it, meaning, hey, you've changed something. I'm going to click up update ISO. So that's just a name, but it applies to all the energy data and the modeling behind there as well. As those files are being updated, the portfolio would be automatically updated, including all these graphs and everything as well. So
Yeah, so you've got basically you've got all. It's not just the technical stuff here; it's the file management, the information, the data management tool. It all comes in a package in that way. So, all right, that's pretty good. That's quarter two now, Megan. There was a question here, and I know it's a pretty. Beg your pardon, Megan.
There's a couple questions.
Yeah, I saw one about temperatures. Can you please show a sample case to show energy emission saving due to changing the dynamic temperature control? Now, I'm assuming that what somebody's asking for here is changing schedules and temperatures. So, Kevin, the best way to see how to do this one. Oh, are you gonna?
I was going to open one of these files, but I can. What did you have in mind?
Well, I was going to do is going to open how I would do this. I would go to the virtual energy analyzer. I go to a specific project, right? So if we go to the virtual energy analyzer,
yeah,
and we pick rather than commercial institutional, pick individual measure,
yeah,
right, like that, and then go down and pick schedules, right, and then it's the first one there. Yeah, it's good. Grab it. You can leave it where it is. So go ahead and open that one up. And what this is going to do for the person asking the question, it's going to bring up a project which is basically a fairly simple situation. So we have a boiler, a chiller, and we have ventilation. So there's a heating load and a cooling load in the ventilation, and the boiler and chiller provide to that. But the schedules on which they're operating and the temperatures that they're heating and cooling the building to is under schedules. So here we see changing of the schedules, right? Actually changing the schedule's the same, but the temperatures are being reduced from 22 to 21, and we can see the impact on greenhouse gas emissions and energy and all the rest of it. So anytime you think of a project and you want to know how to do it, go looking at those individual measures and have a look, because there's probably an example in there around that. Hopefully that answers that question from Mohammed. Thanks for that. Is that what you meant by dynamic temperature control, changing the temperatures? Okay, not seeing any feedback there, but Megan, go ahead.
One more question just saw was using the wastewater plant as an example. Can we use the user-defined function within an archetype to change the intensity being measured from meters squared of area to meters cubed of water treated, for example?
The wastewater treatment plant already does that. So if you go into services, wastewater treatment, I'm going to click OK, import into existing file.
And if you're interested in the wastewater treatment, when you're bringing this up, Kevin, Andrea Dwight from Blue Sky Engineering and myself, we built the archetypes on the wastewater and the water treatment plants. And so there's going to be a webinar, Megan, coming up, right, in a couple of weeks' time, where we actually talk about not so much RETScreen, but sort of opportunities in water and wastewater treatment plants as well. But we do reference RETScreen in that. So yeah, there we go. So it's
10 million cubic meters annually. Yeah. And if you go to the energy worksheet, this text down here will tell you what it is, and it's 28,000 cubic meters a day. If you multiply 28,000 by 365, you get exactly 10 million. So
Yeah, so anytime you want to change the intensity divider, you just go into that where it says facility size, and you have the options underneath the drop down on the units there. Actually, just on the Okay.
Another good question here. How do you calibrate these archetypes with actual data?
Well,
So-
I would go ahead, Kevin.
No, yeah. So there's a couple. I think it's a multi-stage approach, depending on what data you have, right? So the first thing that I do, and I have found myself using it more and more, is the scaling. So just saying, hey, my actual facility is a different size, and using that scaling feature just as I showed you, so that I know that the model is coherent. I just need to scale up the outputs, right? The second step is then going to, on this energy worksheet, going to comparison, and we have here these two cells here, which is project verification. So you can put in what you consumed previously. So maybe, no, we consumed 500,000 cubic meters of gas and only 4.5 million kilowatt hours of electricity. So right now, with those values, I'm overestimating by 7.5% and underestimating just under 5%. That is fine, for example. And so you go. Third step is then going into data and actually start to track that data and start to actually see what it is. Understanding that the data that you are collecting on over a particular year is maybe different than the climate conditions over a year that the energy model is. And I mentioned that because I think I'm going to put myself on a limb here. I think it's foolish to go and chase that 0% delta difference, because you're fooling yourself if you don't think that one night a cool wind comes in and there goes your calibration of your energy model.
And just to clarify that, if you go back to location, right now the energy model in here is based upon the data that's down below here, which is longer term averages. So you can actually, these are blue cells, and in RETScreen, a blue cell is special because you have control over it, but also the software. If you change a location, whatever is in these cells will go to that new location. You can actually use the performance model. I'm not going to go into how to do it. You can use the performance model. You can get the long-term, or you get the weather data from NASA, and you can construct your own climate data and paste that into those blue cells. And if that's the data from last year, because you're calibrating to last year's consumption, now you have a better consumption. So you can now summarize this data, the average temperature data, just do the filter there to month. Yeah, okay.
You can group by month, and then you can, let's do calendar year.
Yeah.
And you can see in this monthly data which months, for a given January is minus 6.3, minus 6.6, or minus 11, which is more appropriate for your area. And you can also, as Stephen said, you can also paste this data. So RETScreen can do an automated aggregation. You say, I want to take the data only since 2021 to the most recent data, and RETScreen will aggregate it in months and paste it over to the other place.
So you basically create your own climate data from weather data. And I use the term climate, longer term. Weather data is short term, but aggregated weather data becomes climate data. So you can modify the basis for the climate data in the model, and then now probably have closer results to your calibration.
Yeah, closer, but don't go crazy. Don't.
Yeah. I always say plus or minus 5 to 10% on those numbers is probably reasonable. So lots of stuff here, eh? Lots of stuff. Now, Megan, we are drawing to the end of our time, so maybe unless you want to highlight any more questions, I'm going to grab the screen back, and you can talk about how there is support even beyond the session that we're doing here today. So, is there any other questions you wanted to touch on, Megan, before we?
A lot of the questions are pretty detailed, and so I think what we're going to cover wrapping up with the slides can provide people some help with those.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you can speak to that. So So, and I know there's people from outside Ontario here. A lot of these questions are going to be within the context of the Save on Energy program that's basically jurisdictions Ontario. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Stephen. So yes, today's workshop was brought to you by Save on Energy. We do have an efficient electrification toolkit that Stephen and other members he's been mentioning today have helped to develop. This is available at Save on Energy's training and support page, which is linked in the slides here. We'll be sharing these slides with you within a few days. This is what the toolkit page looks like. And there's also a link there to our training calendar. So I know you were just mentioning, Stephen, the training on wastewater treatment plants is coming up on June 4th. You could click on that and register. All of these sessions are no cost. And then if we can just move on to the next slide, Stephen, we also offer post-training support. So we do have an intake form. You can click on that, fill out your information, and somebody will be in touch with you directly to schedule kind of some one-on-one support, also provided by Save on Energy. And then lastly, we have the Efficient Electrification Toolkit Help Desk, which is separate from this post-training support. It's a little bit more tailored and it's specific to some of the tools that are available through the Efficient Electrification Toolkit. So that includes some of the RETScreen archetypes that have been developed, just RETScreen coaching one-on-one. And there are some other tools like what's called an interactive fact sheet that will let you quickly assess the difference between a rooftop unit and replacing that with a heat pump. So lots of good information there for you to see. All the links are here. If you need support or further training on RETScreen, please get in touch with us and we'll connect you. I'm really glad to see so much participation in today's session. And like we said, the recording will be posted on the website within a week or two. Also want to thank Gregory Lang, who's been answering some of the questions that I haven't been able to get to. Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for being the creator of RETScreen. It's a great tool.
Thanks, Greg.
Cool. Yeah, there's a question about the GIC or the CIB loans. Given CIB loans tied to level deep, how do you show that getting there is more than the first cost, but also the financing? So actually, that's an interesting question. Because there is actually a pretty, and it's probably more involved, as you say, that may be something that we could work on through the coaching. But there is, if I go into any one of these archetypes, I'm just using up the last few minutes we have here, I'm going to pull up just another one here. So there is a very extensive business model behind any of these archetypes, right? So basically, and the whole idea is that, yeah, first costs don't cut it. It's all about the life cycle costs ultimately. So if we were looking at, I think, the fire hall or the school archetype, they all pretty much look the same at this level. But we were looking at emission reduction. So this is probably, this is the 30 to 40% energy, which is a little less on the emissions. Then we go to the financial model. So here's where we can actually bring into effect, and actually all of the deep retrofit or the deep carbon archetypes actually will have values in terms of financial parameters that came out of what Kevin was doing. If you remember, there was a whole series of financial parameters. So here's where you can do essentially the present value analysis to demonstrate that it's not about first cost. You can show which are over the life cycle, which are the cheaper options. You can calculate in these cases the IRR and the MIR, savings to investment ratio, and the net present value. So basically, present value analysis on any of these particular examples. So I think that's the answer to a large extent to the question about the interest rate being tied to the level of GHG reductions. But ultimately, the way I look at any of these things today, years and years 45 years ago, they asked me to calculate simple payback, and I continue to do it for many years. But what I've realized is simple payback is not good enough. These are investment opportunities, and that's how it ends. These are investment opportunities. They needed to be treated as investments. They needed to be analyzed properly. This is actually where RETScreen got its start, was on the idea of a decision-making tool, which had the correct and robust financial analysis. Again, thanks, Greg, because I think that was where it all started. Not only can we do the present value analysis nicely, but we can also do risk and sensitivity analysis, looking at multiple scenarios and which parameters presents the most risk, and what are the likely outcomes. So way beyond what we do today. But again, e-learning, go up here, financial and risk analysis for projects in RETScreen. So have a look at that. Definitely get some insight there. But again, I'm happy to answer some of those questions in a one-on-one session too, right? For folks through the coaching. Megan, I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's it. Unless anybody has any further questions. Thanks for joining us. Yes, Hugh.
Yeah, sorry, I was being distracted at my desk for a second when you were saying about the link to the page where you could fill out your that one.
Yeah. So it'll be on
Yeah.
the slides. So just wait till you get the slides.
Oh,
Actually,
I got you. Okay.
I can just throw this in the chat, right? Megan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just throw this in the chat right now. So, right. So that's again for Save on Energy participants. Whoops, come back here, computer.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, well, that's high praise. You, because you just went through 3 days of certified RETScreen expert. So hopefully we've added some more value to that. And thank you to Kevin, because these things, you can't do them alone, right? We need teamwork. So thank you, Kevin, and all the other folks at RETScreen to support this.
Yeah, I love doing this. It's always great to connect and see people. So yeah.
Okay, I think everybody's dropping off, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thanks once again. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Stephen. And thank you, Greg.